I have this very distinct memory from when I was a kid. Toonami would air a new episode of Naruto every week on Cartoon Network, and me and my middle brother, who's about 2 years older than me, would go over to my grandma's house because she had cable and my house didn't, and we'd watch the new episode of Naruto. I watched some of the most iconic moments in the show in front of that TV. The Forest of Death, Rock Lee vs. Gaara, Sasuke's first Chidori. I look back at those memories really fondly, and I bet I'm not the only one who'd put Naruto near the front of a long list of shows that made me fall in love with anime. Through all its glory, Naruto had a lot of problems. While the highs soared so high, the lows were just so treacherously low. That's why today, when I'm making the case that Jujutsu Kaisen just is doing what Naruto did better, it's coming from a place of respect. I'm sure I'm not the only one that saw similarities between Jujutsu Kaisen and Naruto. But for anyone who doesn't see it and is wondering how similar can they be, well, they're just shows with a main character who's a loud and expressive goofball who acts unapologetically like himself, slowly gaining the respect of everyone around him through the sheer force of being a good-hearted, caring person, and he harbors a malicious, powerful, evil spirit inside him that comes out, causing him to lose control. At some points, the main character will even have conversations with that spirit in a dark and moody domain. And while we're on the topic of dark and moody, the main character will have a classmate that he constantly gets in arguments with, while the protagonist will recklessly abandon his own safety to help others indiscriminately. His dark and moody teammate will often have a more measured philosophy, but then is forced outside of his comfort zone when the protagonist makes rash decisions. That same teammate was born with special, innate abilities related to the magic system and was separated from his family. These two characters are joined by a third classmate who's a strong and angry young woman. Often she'll yell at her teammates, all while working hard to be perceived as beautiful. These three students will attend a school that teaches people how to protect the world around them through practical missions and academic competitions. The main three characters are part of a team led by a silver-haired, strong, cool teacher who has a blindfold he takes off during intense battles to increase his power. Yeah, there's a couple similarities. Naruto was a generation-defining show, and I think Jujutsu Kaisen has the potential to become one. Before I make my case, there's a couple disclaimers I have to make. First, I'm just talking about season 1 of the anime Jujutsu Kaisen. I'm not talking about the manga. And I'm comparing that to both Naruto and Naruto Shippuden. So for future reference, when I say Naruto, I'm referring to both series. And I know that this isn't a fair comparison. I'm juxtaposing a series that ran for 10 years and one that's released a single season. But I do think it's a comparison that should be made. So that being said, this is why Jujutsu Kaisen is doing what Naruto did better. First, I'm sure you've heard that really popular quote from Isaac Newton talking about standing on the shoulders of giants. Essentially, in this case, it's saying that Jujutsu Kaisen has the opportunity to be better because it can learn from the mistakes and successes of shows like Naruto. Generally speaking, people get better at things as time goes on. Professional athletics have become more competitive. Speedrunners are breaking records we didn't think were possible to break. And I only cried for like 4 minutes last week when I stubbed my toe. People are improving quicker because we have the opportunity to learn from those before us. Next, Naruto had to release continuously, whereas Jujutsu Kaisen releases seasonally. For those who don't know about seasonal anime is now released in 4 seasons: winter, spring, summer, and fall. By having the opportunity to take gaps between releasing seasons of shows, animation production companies have an opportunity to polish their products more. Not only that, but anime has become more popular, which has increased profitability. Companies have more incentive to invest large sums of money in creating an anime.
Tobias, what are you doing?
Throwing money at the problem.
Okay, money isn't the solution to every problem.
It is if you've got enough.
Things like this should make it easier for anime to be better. And if you look at the general quality of anime as a whole, we've seen a golden age. But in some ways, when it comes to art, we see the opposite. If you look at a top 100 list, you'll almost exclusively see older shows. Why is that the case? I like thinking of music when talking about this because a lot of people will look at older generations of music with a lot of envy. People will point out all the music they don't like that's being released today as an example of why music's gotten worse, when in reality, bad music has always been released, but good music withstands the trial of time. But sometimes when we go rewatch nostalgic shows that influenced us growing up, they don't hold up. What's weird about Naruto is it falls into this category of both great and very bad. I just don't think there's a well-written female character in Naruto. There's a lot of characters that have tons of potential, like Hinata and Sakura, but every time they seem to make any growth in their character arc, the writer would just throw it away for stupid, generic reasons. Do you remember when Sakura finally seemed to be moving on from Sasuke and then kind of in a weird out of the blue moment confesses her love for Naruto? Then suddenly 6 episodes later, she confesses her love for Sasuke as the cliffhanger for the end of the episode. And then there's another entire episode where it doesn't even talk about what just happened, it just focuses on Naruto's perspective. We'll talk about that bad pacing later. Then in the episode following that, now 8 episodes after she confessed her love for Naruto, she says she's gonna defect from the Hidden Leaf Village and go support Sasuke and do whatever he says, no matter what. Oh my god, how could they fuck up a character this bad? What makes it even worse is that she was finally growing, and this just comes out of the blue. One of the most common narratives when talking about what Jujutsu Kaisen does right is the production quality. Bonsai Pop has a wonderful video already talking about this, so I'm not going to go into more detail about the production quality. But I think the primary difference between Naruto and Jujutsu Kaisen comes down to 2 components. Number 1, pacing. Number 2, characters. If you were to watch Naruto straight, all 720 episodes, including the filler, how long would it take you to watch it? Well, Google said anywhere from 216 to 264 hours. That's over 9 straight days of watching a show without sleep, eating, or anything else. And 41% of Naruto's episodes are filler. For those who aren't familiar, filler in anime often occurs when a show catches up to the source material, which is the manga, so they create episodes or arcs that don't apply to the main story or storyline, so that the manga writer has more time to develop the story. This was especially common with any anime that was releasing continuously, so obviously Naruto has some issues with pacing. Even if you ignore all the filler, I still think that there's examples of things that Jujutsu Kaisen did and implemented that made for better pacing than Naruto. Shippuden dedicated an entire arc to Naruto learning the Rasen Shuriken Jutsu, and that's the point of most shows like Naruto and Jujutsu Kaisen. They have characters who get stronger and grow and take on bigger challenges. But when Jujutsu Kaisen does a training arc, it's not just training. They have the story progressing, they have other characters being introduced, they have big fights and conflict between important characters in the story. So there isn't some big gap, it's just faster paced. And this exemplifies what happens throughout the entire show. There's a lot of depth. The show is very dense, a lot happens every episode. Now at times I think that this can also hurt Jujutsu Kaisen. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, because there were multiple times while I was watching season 1 where an arc would be developing and pacing really well, and then they would almost fast forward, or so much would happen in such a short time, it would feel like I got lost. But that being said, I'd heavily prefer a show that travels a little bit too fast than one that travels way too slow. And I think it's important to acknowledge that there is preference involved here, right? Like some people like shows that run lots of episodes. They don't want things to end. But I think if you were to take every episode of Naruto and categorize them anywhere from 1 to 10 in quality, I think that a lot of those episodes would fall into the lower side of the spectrum, whereas Jujutsu Kaisen I think would mostly fall into the upper side of the spectrum. So on one hand, you could look at the average quality of an episode as a major defining factor of how good an anime is, but I think there's another important component, the peaks. Earlier I talked about how influential Naruto was for me as a kid. That's because Naruto had so many scenes that were these 10 out of 10 moments, just kind of things that would make you go yeah. When Naruto fights Sasuke the first time, when Sasuke wants to leave, when Rock Lee fights Gaara, or when Kakashi fights Obito. The scenes are magnificent, and it's part of the reason I love Naruto so much, because when the show hits, it hits so fucking hard. But that's why I think Jujutsu Kaisen is such a good anime, because it has those yeah moments without all the baggage. To keep making this comparison, this is the point where I gotta start spoiling stuff, so if you haven't seen Jujutsu Kaisen, now's the time to click away. I'm gonna be spoiling things from the first season of the anime. I think a good place to start whenever you're analyzing storytelling is focusing on how much they show versus tell. Jujutsu Kaisen does a great job teaching its audience about the magic system. It shows instead of telling. This isn't a sports anime where we have 2 people on the sidelines explaining the rules. I love that our first exposure to domain expansion is when Gojo is fighting Jogo. You think you're so clever. But as Itadori is learning about the magic system, so is the audience. And like a good teacher, and maybe even a good storyteller, Gojo decided that the best way to teach Itadori is by showing him. This is a component that makes for such strong pacing within Jujutsu Kaisen. It feels like there's something always going on that's important, and it's layered. This is also how we're introduced to the bad guys. The story is setting up the villains and the power levels within the structure. They're showing how much of a badass Gojo is and why the curses can't just fight him straight up. By losing Itadori, there's also character development with his two teammates. There's a lot going on in these couple episodes, and I don't have an issue with the fact that Naruto took so long to use his ability. It makes it more satisfying when it eventually does work. It's that very little in the story was going on outside of the training. Okay, so far I've claimed that Jujutsu Kaisen has higher production quality and it has much better pacing. But the thing that made me want to make this video was the differences between Naruto's big three and Jujutsu Kaisen's big three, because they struck me as so similar in archetype, but so different in quality. Let's start with Naruto versus Itadori. The premise of Naruto's character is actually very interesting. What if you take someone that vies for attention, acts out, and is boisterous, loud, and annoying, and you explain the reason? I think that's a fun premise for a character. But the problem with that is he ends up being really annoying. There are cool moments where people become attached and develop relationships with Naruto because he is a good character. The problem is you have to deal with all the annoying stuff. And for a lot of people, that was a major deterrent to the show. I'd also say Naruto doesn't have a lot of depth. He's a cool character, but he falls prey to so many anime protagonist tropes. And I know that there's a good case to be made that Itadori also falls into that tropey main character category, but there's a lot of things that happen with Itadori throughout season 1 of Jujutsu Kaisen that makes me think he's a better character. I think the reoccurring point that he's freakishly strong leads to a lot of funny moments in the show, but also is crucial for his character growth. He starts the story so cocky and confident, at times blowing the minds of his teachers and peers. But that makes it more interesting when he gets put in scenarios that actually highlight how weak he is. Like when he gets completely overwhelmed with the strength of the special grade, or when he struggles to keep up with Todo. It means something. It contextualizes the scale of the people around him. It's interesting to watch Itadori struggle with the fact that he spent his entire life being so overwhelmingly capable, but now he's a peon, a fly on the wall in comparison to the curses and people around him. I think Itadori's character is a fresh take on that classic, good-hearted shonen protagonist who constantly wants to get better. They're taking the tropes, embracing them, and then pivoting, making something a little bit more unique. And this ties nicely into my next comparisons, because one of the things that makes Itadori a better character than Naruto is his relationship to his teammates. Itadori and Megumi's relationship is much more interesting to me than Sasuke and Naruto's. Pretty early on, it stopped making sense why Naruto cared about Sasuke. When they were kids and Sasuke chose to leave to seek out Orochimaru to become more powerful, it was reasonable that Naruto wanted to stop him and prevent him from making that mistake. But as Shippuden continued, that dynamic made less and less sense. Sasuke somehow continues to one-up himself by becoming a bigger and bigger asshole throughout the series. Something Naruto and Sasuke had going in the beginning was Sasuke was reluctantly becoming attached to the group around him and developing emotions. But I just think Megumi's character is doing that in a less annoying way by actually expressing how he feels about Itadori to Gojo. But there's more to it than just that relationship. There's other things that make Megumi a really interesting character. He has a trump card where he can just magically win any battle. I assume it's something along the lines of trading his life to exorcise a demon. I think that's cool. I think it's really interesting that he has a special ability that's a little bit more dynamic than Sharingan, which start as special eyes and become whatever the hell they are after that crazy power creep. And they don't just stop there, it becomes more. Because of this trump card, Megumi has never allowed himself to risk his own life. It's prevented his growth, because it would be selfish to do so. This is just another example of the writers taking a common trope and adding depth, making it a little bit more complex, a little bit fresher. And it kind of touches on this thing that happens a lot in this show. Jujutsu Kaisen gives answers. Now, some of the answers aren't always the best and they don't always make sense, but at least they're there. What is the solution for the fact that in most anime, you need the characters to explain their abilities so the audience isn't confused? Jujutsu Kaisen gives people a power-up if they explain their powers to their opponent. Does it make sense? Kind of, but I definitely prefer that over just random bullshit that there is no reason for. I prefer Megumi's character over Sasuke's. I like that he shares his emotions and is influenced by the perspective Itadori brings that differs from his. It's also pretty cool that Sukuna has some sort of stake in seeing the way Megumi develops. He's interested. And they give Megumi a really awesome moment in season 1 when he has to come back and take on a stronger version of the special grade that he ran away from in terror, but now he faces it head on with his domain expansion. It's a very cool moment. It's badass. It's very fun. I just think Megumi's a well-written character that complements Itadori well. And while I think Itadori's a better character than Naruto and Megumi's a better character than Sasuke, the biggest difference is between Kugisaki and Sakura. You've already heard some of my grievances earlier in the video with the way Sakura is written, but I think that there's one situation from both series that perfectly exemplify the differences between the characters. With shows like this, it's important to give characters their moment. There's a good example of this with Sakura in the Forest of Death. She sacrifices something very important to her, which is her hair that represents her beauty, in order to overcome an obstacle, or at least that's what they try to do. But the problem is they kind of undermine the moment in a lot of ways. She doesn't really do much afterwards. She then immediately gets bailed out by Ino, Shikamaru, and Choji, and then after that they get bailed out by Sasuke's new curse. It really could have been a substantial moment that led to continuous growth with Sakura, but it doesn't really feel like much comes afterwards. I can count the amount of times this happens for Sakura on one hand, whereas in juxtaposition, there's as many moments that undermine her character, that take away from that growth. It's incredibly frustrating because for most of the story, her character gets reduced to someone who's in love with Sasuke and nothing more. At first, I wasn't really sure Kugisaki's character was going to be more interesting than Sakura's. Shonens in general have a tendency to write female characters poorly, but in the final arc of season 1, they do so many things right with her character. Not only do they give her her special moment, we'll get to that one later, but they give her a lot of small moments that I think add to the character. For example, in that final fight, when they're running away from the blood magic and Itadori asks if she can run any faster and she responds no. He picks her up and then takes off. And then instead of being self-conscious because he's faster than her or because she needs to rely on a teammate to help her, she finds a way to be useful and tells him she has his back. Another good example is how Kugisaki consoles Itadori when he's struggling with the fact that he's had to kill humans and not just cursed spirits. There's a lot of small things like this that add up in making a character that's likable, interesting, and someone we can root for. But I was just so excited when they gave Kugisaki her moment. With their backs against the wall, poison in their systems, and limited movement, Kugisaki comes in clutch, putting herself through an immense amount of pain to give her teammate Itadori the opportunity to strike their opponents. It is one of the most badass moments I've seen in anime. The artwork, choreography, music, animation, all of it adds to this incredible moment when she snaps.